He spent months acting like I was special, but when I finally spoke up, he told everyone I misunderstood everything. And in that moment, as I stood in our cluttered kitchen with the dishwasher humming softly in the background and the faint scent of leftover pasta from dinner clinging to the air, the words hit me like a physical blow. My heart pounding so hard, I thought it might shatter the mug of cooling coffee I was gripping too tightly. The one with the faded "World's Best Dad" print that our son Jamie had picked out for Alex last Father's Day at the school craft fair, back when everything felt solid and unshakable. But now, as Alex leaned against the counter, his phone still in his hand from where he'd been scrolling through messages that weren't meant for my eyes, his face a mask of defensive regret, I realized the foundation we'd built over 12 years of marriage was crumbling under the weight of his secrets. Secrets that had started innocently enough, or so he'd claim later, with late nights at the office where he was supposedly buried in spreadsheets for that big promotion at the marketing firm downtown. But I'd noticed the changes, subtle at first, like how he'd smile at his screen during family movie nights on the couch, Jamie curled up between us with popcorn spilling onto the throw blanket, or how he'd linger in the shower longer than usual, emerging with a fresh shave and that cologne I hadn't smelled on him in months, the one I'd bought him for our anniversary. And I'd brushed it off as stress or midlife whims, telling myself it was nothing when I'd see him typing furiously on his laptop in the dim light of our bedroom after I'd pretended to fall asleep, the blue glow illuminating his face in a way that made him look younger, more alive. But tonight, after Jamie had gone to bed with his homework tucked away and his soccer cleats by the door for tomorrow's practice, I'd finally mustered the courage to ask about the notifications that kept pinging, the ones he'd silence with a quick glance and a mumbled, "work stuff." And when I picked up his phone from the charging station on the kitchen island, my hands trembling slightly from the glass of wine I'd had to steady my nerves after a long day at the elementary school where I taught 3rd grade, dealing with endless parent emails and lesson plans on fractions that made my head spin, I saw her name, Elena, popping up in a thread of messages that stretched back months. Messages filled with emojis and inside jokes about coffee runs and shared playlists. Things that made my stomach twist because they echoed the way we'd flirted back in college, when Alex would leave notes in my dorm mailbox about our favorite indie bands and late-night diner dates. And as I scrolled deeper, the words blurred through my tears. Phrases like, "You make me feel seen," and "can't wait to steal another lunch break with you." And there were photos, too. Not explicit, but intimate. Her laughing in a park we'd never visited together, him with that arm-around-shoulder pose that felt like a betrayal, sharper than any knife. And when I confronted him, my voice barely above a whisper at first, "Alex, who's Elena?" He froze, his eyes widening in that split second of panic before he composed himself, setting down his own coffee and reaching out as if to touch my arm, but I flinched away, the mug slipping from my fingers and shattering on the tile floor, sending shards skittering under the fridge where we'd stuck Jamie's latest drawing of our family, stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. And he sighed, rubbing his temples like this was just another argument about bills or whose turn it was to handle the school run. "It's not what you think, Sarah," he said, using my name in that formal way that always signaled he was buying time. "She's just a colleague. We've been working on a project, and yeah, we got close, but it's nothing physical, I swear." But I could see the lie in the way his gaze started to the phone, now face down on the counter as if that could hide the evidence. And I pressed him, my voice rising despite my effort to keep it low so Jamie wouldn't wake up in his room upstairs, with the nightlight glowing softly through the crack in the door. "Then why all the messages? Why tell her things you haven't told me in years?" And that's when the dam broke, his confession spilling out in halting sentences, admitting that it started with venting about work stress, how the long hours were wearing him down, and she listened, really listened, in a way I hadn't since Jamie came along, and our lives became a whirlwind of pediatrician appointments and PTA meetings, soccer games on rainy Saturdays where we'd huddle under umbrellas with thermoses of hot chocolate, and family dinners rushed between homework help and Netflix episodes of that animated show Jamie loved. But as he spoke, I felt the raw pain slicing through me, guilt mingling with anger because maybe I had been distant, buried in my own exhaustion from grading papers late into the night while he handled bedtime stories. But that didn't excuse this emotional affair that made me question every tender moment we'd shared recently, like the weekend getaway to the lake house last month where we'd sat on the porch swing watching the sunset, his hand in mine, and I thought we were reconnecting. But now I wondered if he was thinking of her, comparing us, and the thought made bile rise in my throat, forcing me to turn away and brace myself against the sink, staring out at the darkened backyard where the swing set Jamie had outgrown creaked in the evening breeze. And Alex kept talking, his voice pleading now. "I never meant to hurt you. It just happened. She's going through a divorce and we bonded over that. But you're my wife, Sarah. I love you." But the words felt hollow, echoing in the space between us that suddenly felt vast, unbridgeable. And I whispered, "How long?" knowing the answer would gut me. And he admitted, 4 months. 4 months of acting like I was special with those surprise flowers on my birthday or the way he'd kiss my forehead before leaving for work, all while pouring his heart into someone else. And the immediate fallout hit like a storm. Me grabbing my keys from the hook by the door, the one with the family photo keychain from our last vacation to Disney where Jamie's face lit up at the fireworks, and telling him I needed air, needed to think, as I stepped out into the cool night, the suburban street quiet except for a neighbor's dog barking in the distance, my mind racing with images of our life together, the mornings where I'd pack Jamie's lunch with his favorite peanut butter sandwiches cut into shapes, the evenings where Alex and I would collapse on the couch after tucking him in, sharing a bowl of ice cream and talking about our days, dreams of maybe having another child someday when things stabilized at work. But now it all felt tainted, poisoned by this revelation, and as I walked aimlessly down the sidewalk, passing houses with warm lights glowing in windows, families inside probably oblivious to how fragile it all is, I felt the tears streaming down my face, hot and unrelenting, the pain so acute it was physical. yet beneath the anger and grief, a sliver of something else stirred, a desperate wish that this wasn't the end, that we could somehow claw our way back. But right then, in the raw immediacy of the betrayal, all I could do was keep walking, the streetlights blurring through my tears, the world feeling smaller and infinitely more lonely as the first drops of rain began to fall, mirroring the storm raging inside me. The rain had picked up by the time I slipped back through the front door an hour later, my sneakers squeaking on the hardwood foyer, water dripping from the hem of my hoodie onto the mat where Jamie's soccer ball sat abandoned, still muddy from last weekend's game. And the house felt different now, quieter in a way that pressed against my eardrums, the kind of silence that follows a scream, as if every creak of the floorboards and hum of the refrigerator had been asked to hold its breath. I peeled off my wet socks in the entryway, leaving them in a sodden heap because the thought of walking to the laundry room felt insurmountable, and padded barefoot toward the living room, where the lamp on the side table cast a soft amber pool over the couch we'd bought on sale 3 years ago, after Jamie had spilled grape juice on the old one. The cushions still faintly indented from the shape of our bodies during countless evenings spent side by side, watching documentaries or arguing gently about whether to renew the streaming service we barely used anymore. Alex was there, sitting forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at the dark television screen as though it might offer answers if he waited long enough, his phone nowhere in sight, probably hidden in a drawer or left upstairs like a guilty secret. And when he heard me, he didn't turn right away, just exhaled a long, shaky breath that told me he'd been crying too, or at least fighting not to, the way men sometimes do when they think no one's watching, shoulders rigid, jaw working. I stopped in the doorway, arms wrapped around myself against the chill that had settled into my bones despite the heat still running, and for a long minute neither of us spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, the same cheap wooden one my mother had given us as a housewarming gift, its second hand moving with deliberate indifference to the wreckage unfolding beneath it. Finally he looked up, eyes wet-rimmed and swollen in a way I hadn't seen since his father's funeral 4 years ago, and said very quietly, "I thought you weren't coming back tonight." His voice cracked on the last word, and something in me wanted to cross the room and hold him, to erase the distance with touch the way we used to when arguments ended in apologies and tangled limbs. But the memory of those messages, of "you make me feel alive again," typed out in the same thumbs that once traced my spine, kept my feet rooted. Instead I whispered, "I almost didn't," and watched the way his face crumpled for a second before he caught himself, nodding like he understood he had no right to ask for comfort. He stood slowly, as if every joint ached, and gestured toward the kitchen. "I made tea. Chamomile. It's probably cold now." The smallness of the offer, the fact that he'd gone through the motions of boiling water, measuring out the bag, stirring in the honey I like, made fresh tears prick behind my eyes, because it was the same thoughtfulness he'd shown me for years, the same care that had convinced me once that we were building something permanent, and now it felt like evidence of how easily he could perform love while reserving the real thing for someone else. I followed him anyway, needing the mundane ritual more than I needed pride, and we ended up at the island, him on one stool, me on the other, the shattered mug from earlier swept into a neat pile in the corner with the broom still leaning against the cabinets like an accusation. He pushed the mug toward me. The tea was indeed lukewarm, but I wrapped my hands around it anyway, letting the faint warmth seep into my palms. "I deleted the thread," he said after a sip of his own, staring into the cup as though the answers were floating in the amber liquid. "And I blocked her number. I told her it was over, that I'd messed up everything." His voice was flat, rehearsed almost, like he'd practiced the sentence in his head while I was gone. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I thought about the months I'd spent wondering why he seemed happier some days, why he'd come home whistling tunes I didn't recognize, why sex had felt both urgent and distant, as though he were chasing something he couldn't quite reach with me. "You told her you loved her?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it, soft but precise. He flinched. "Not in those words. But I said things. I said I felt things with her I hadn't felt in a long time. I was stupid, Sarah. I was lonely and flattered, and I didn't think it through." The admission landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through every memory I'd clung to. The way he'd surprised me with breakfast in bed on Mother's Day, even though Jamie helped. The late-night talks about maybe trying for another baby once my teaching contract stabilized. The quiet pride in his eyes when Jamie scored his first goal. All of it now felt provisional, conditional on his mood, on whether someone else was paying attention to him that week. I set the mug down too hard. Tea sloshed over the rim. "I trusted you," I said, and the simplicity of it broke something open in my chest, sobs rising so fast I couldn't swallow them back. He reached across the island but stopped short when I recoiled. His hand hovered, then fell back to his lap. "I know," he whispered. "I know." We sat like that for what felt like hours, crying separately but in the same room, the rain drumming steadily against the windows, the dishwasher long since finished its cycle and clicked into silence. Eventually I stood, legs unsteady, and told him I was sleeping in the guest room tonight, the small one with the daybed we'd bought for when my sister visited, the one still piled with folded laundry I'd never put away. And he didn't argue, just nodded, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, 38 years old and suddenly boyish in his defeat. Upstairs I checked on Jamie first, easing his door open just enough to see him sprawled under the dinosaur comforter, mouth slightly open, one arm flung out, the nightlight projecting stars across the ceiling in a slow rotation that used to soothe me too when I couldn't sleep. The sight of him safe and unaware twisted the knife deeper, because tomorrow he would wake up expecting the same dad who made him pancakes shaped like soccer balls, the same mom who kissed his forehead and reminded him to pack his water bottle, and I had no idea how to give him that version of us when the ground beneath my own feet was gone. I closed his door softly, went to the guest room, pulled the spare quilt over me without changing out of my damp clothes, and lay there listening to the house settle, the furnace kicking on, the rain easing to a drizzle, Alex's footsteps creaking down the hall then stopping outside my door for a long moment before retreating to our bedroom, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my ribs. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow and fractured, filled with dreams of conversations I hadn't had yet, of Jamie asking why Daddy looked sad, of Alina's face I'd never seen but could picture perfectly, smiling, sympathetic, understanding in ways I suddenly felt I'd failed to be. In the darkest part of the night, I woke to the sound of Alex moving around downstairs, probably unable to sleep either, and for a fleeting second I considered going to him, curling into his side the way I used to when nightmares woke me. But the weight of what he'd done, of 4 months spent building something parallel to our life, kept me under the quilt, staring at the ceiling, letting the tears slide silently into the pillow, wondering if trust could ever be pieced back together once it had shattered so completely, or if we were simply waiting for morning to decide whether to keep trying or finally let go. Morning arrived in fragments, the gray light seeping around the edges of the guest room blinds, the distant clatter of Jamie's cereal bowl against the kitchen table, the low murmur of the television tuned to cartoons so he wouldn't notice the unusual quiet. And I laid there for several long minutes after waking, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling fan that spun lazily above me, its pull chain swaying like a metronome, counting the seconds I had left before I had to face the day as though nothing had changed, even though every cell in my body knew it had. My eyes were puffy from crying, my throat raw, and when I finally forced myself upright, the quilt slid to the floor with a soft thud that felt too loud in the stillness. I dressed in yesterday's clothes because opening the closet in our bedroom seemed like crossing an invisible line I wasn't ready for, then slipped downstairs, pausing at the bottom step to listen. Alex's voice, gentle, asking Jamie if he wanted banana slices on his Cheerios, the scrape of the knife against the cutting board, the rustle of the lunch bag being zipped, and the normalcy of it pierced me so sharply I had to press a hand to my sternum to steady my breathing. When I stepped into the kitchen, Jamie looked up from his bowl, milk dripping from his spoon, and grinned the way he always did when he saw me first thing. Oblivious. Perfect. Mom, Dad said we can stop for slushies after practice if I finish all my math homework on the way home. And I managed a smile that felt like lifting weights, nodding, that sounds great, buddy, while my gaze flicked to Alex, standing at the counter packing the lunch, his back to me, shoulders tense under the same gray t-shirt he'd worn to bed. He turned then, eyes meeting mine for the first time since last night, and the look that passed between us was careful, almost formal, like strangers negotiating the same small space, before he said quietly, coffee's fresh. I can drive him to school if you want some time. The offer hung there, practical and loaded. He was giving me an out, space to breathe without Jamie watching us pretend, and part of me wanted to refuse on principle, to make him feel the full weight of what he'd broken. But the bigger part, the part that still remembered how Jamie used to cry when we argued in front of him even over little things like whose turn it was to load the dishwasher, accepted. Okay, I said, voice barely above a whisper, and Jamie, sensing nothing, chattered on about the new goalie on his team while I poured coffee I didn't really want, the mug warm against palms that still felt cold from the inside out. After they left, Jamie's backpack bouncing against his narrow shoulders, Alex's hand resting lightly on the top of his head as they walked to the car, I stood in the doorway watching the taillights disappear around the corner, rain from last night still glistening on the driveway, and the silence rushed in so fast it made my ears ring. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let myself slide down until I was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up, forehead resting on them, and the tears came again, quieter this time, the kind that leak out because the body has no other way to release pressure. When the sobs eased, I pulled out my phone, habit more than intention, and saw 3 missed calls from my sister Lisa, who lived 40 minutes away in the next suburb over, and always seemed to sense when something was wrong even before I did. I texted her back a simple, "Can you come over? Need to talk." And she replied almost instantly, "On my way. Be there in 45. While I waited, I moved through the house on autopilot, wiping the kitchen counters, folding the throw blanket Jamie had dragged to the couch last night, picking up his discarded socks from the hallway, small acts that felt like trying to hold the pieces of normal life together with my bare hands. Lisa arrived just as the school bus would have been picking up the neighborhood kids, her knock soft but insistent. When I opened the door, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug without asking questions, her coat still damp from the drizzle, smelling faintly of the vanilla candle she always burned in her car. We ended up at the kitchen table with fresh coffee neither of us drank, and I told her everything. Not in the frantic rush of last night, but slowly, haltingly, each detail landing like stones in a pond. The messages, the 4 months, the way Alex had looked at me when I asked if he loved her, the way he'd said not in those words, as though that made it better. She listened without interrupting, fingers laced around her mug, and when I finished, she reached across and covered my hand with hers. "You don't have to decide anything today," she said, "but you do have to protect Jamie from the worst of it, at least until you know what you want." The words landed with the clarity I'd been missing. I'd spent the night cycling through rage and grief and self-blame, but hearing someone else say it out loud, that Jamie came first, crystallized the one boundary I could set right now. When Alex returned from dropping Jamie at school, he found us still at the table. He stopped in the doorway, keys dangling from his fingers, and I could see the flicker of relief that Lisa was there, someone to buffer what came next. "We need to talk," I said, and he nodded, setting the keys on the hook, shrugging out of his jacket. Lisa excused herself to the living room. "I'll be right here if you need me," and Alex sat across from me, hands flat on the table like he was bracing for impact. I spoke first, keeping my voice low and even despite the tremor underneath. "I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I ever will be. But Jamie doesn't get to carry this, so for now, we keep things steady for him. Same routines, same bedtime stories, same smiles when he walks in the room. No fighting in front of him, no disappearing acts. And you don't get to touch me, or act like nothing happened when he's not looking. We sleep apart until I say otherwise." He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on a spot just past my shoulder. "Okay," he said, the word rough. "Anything else?" I thought about the phone still in his pocket, the laptop on his desk upstairs. "Full transparency. I want access to your phone, your email, your work calendar, everything. Not to spy, but because I can't trust words right now, and no more late nights at the office unless I know exactly where you are." He nodded again, slower this time, and reached into his pocket, slid the phone across the table without me asking. Password still Jamie's birthday. The small surrender shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. It was the first concrete thing he'd given up without argument. I didn't pick it up right away, just stared at it lying there between us like a truce flag, and then I said, "I'm going to call a therapist today. For me, first. Maybe for us later if I can stand being in the same room with you for an hour." He looked up then, really looked at me, and I saw something raw flash across his face. Regret, yes, but also fear. The kind that comes when you realize the person you hurt might actually walk away. "I'll go too," he said, "whenever you're ready." We sat in silence after that, the kitchen clock ticking, the faint sound of Lisa flipping magazine pages in the next room, until Jamie's school bus rumbled past outside and I realized the morning was slipping away. I stood, handed him back his phone. "Keep it on you, but don't hide anything," and told him I was taking the rest of the day off work, that I needed to pick Jamie up myself today so I could see his face when he talked about his day, so I could remind myself why I was even considering staying in this house another night. Alex didn't argue. He just watched me grab my keys and coat, and as I passed Lisa, she squeezed my arm, a silent promise she'd stay until I got back. Driving to the school later, radio off, windows cracked to let in the damp February air, I rehearsed the afternoon in my head. Picking Jamie up, asking about his spelling test, stopping for that promised slushie even if it tasted like nothing, bringing him home to a dad who would help with homework, and a mom who would read the next chapter of his fantasy book with a steady voice. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close, but it was protection, the only shield I could ray right now between my son's world and the fracture running through the center of mine. And as the school parking lot came into view, kids streaming out in bright jackets, I felt the smallest shift inside me. Not hope exactly, but resolve. I would hold the line for Jamie until I figured out whether there was anything left worth saving for the rest of us. By Friday afternoon, the house had settled into an uneasy rhythm that felt like walking on cracked ice. Every step deliberate, every conversation measured so Jamie wouldn't sense the fault lines beneath our feet. And when the final school bell rang, I was already waiting in the pickup line, engine idling, heater blasting against the February chill that had returned after a brief tease of sun, my fingers drumming the steering wheel to the muffled pop song playing low on the radio, while I watched other parents scroll through phones or chat through open windows. Jamie bounded out with his usual energy, backpack swinging, waving to a friend before climbing into the back seat and launching into a detailed recap of recess kickball drama that involved someone named Mateo and a disputed goal. I nodded along, asking the right follow-up questions. Did the teacher have to step in? What did Mateo say after? While my mind kept drifting to the email I'd sent that morning to a therapist whose website promised compassionate support for individuals and couples navigating betrayal. Her intake form still open in another tab on my phone, waiting for me to hit submit. Alex had left for work earlier than usual, claiming a client call, but he texted a photo of his empty office desk. Here all day, promise. Followed by a screenshot of his calendar showing back-to-back meetings until 6. The kind of transparency I demanded, but that now felt both reassuring and exhausting, like I was policing a crime scene instead of living in my own home. When we pulled into the driveway, Jamie raced inside to grab his soccer gear for practice, and I sat in the car a moment longer, staring at the garage door Alex had promised to oil last fall but never did, the small neglect suddenly emblematic of everything we'd let slide. I needed out. Not forever, not dramatically, just long enough to hear my own thoughts without the constant reminder of his footsteps overhead or the way the couch still held the imprint of his body from last night when he'd fallen asleep there watching a basketball game with the sound muted. So I texted Lisa again. Can I crash at your place this weekend? Just me. Jamie's with Alex for the games and homework. Her reply came in seconds. Guest room's yours. Bring wine or don't. Either way, door's open. Relief washed through me so fast my shoulders dropped. I went inside, helped Jamie pack an extra water bottle and his favorite protein bar, then found Alex in the laundry room folding towels when he got home early. Another small proof of effort. Or maybe just guilt. And told him quietly while Jamie was upstairs changing. I'm going to Lisa's tonight through Sunday. I need space to think. You've got him. Practice, games, meals, bedtime. I'll be back Monday morning before school drop-off. He stopped folding, the towel half folded in his hands, and looked at me with something close to panic before he masked it. Okay, he said after a beat. I'll keep him busy. Text me if you need anything. No pleading, no argument, just acceptance that felt like progress and defeat at the same time. I packed a small duffel in silence, yoga pants, a few sweaters, the novel I'd been meaning to finish for months, my journal, the charger. And when I hugged Jamie goodbye in the foyer, I held him a second longer than usual, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and the faint grass smell from recess, whispering, "Be good for Dad, okay? I love you to the moon and back." And he squeezed me tight, already distracted by the promise of pizza for dinner, because Alex had texted him the plan while I was packing. Driving to Lisa's felt like shedding weight with every mile. The highway stretched out under sodium lights just starting to flicker on, rain spitting against the windshield in intermittent bursts. And I let myself cry without sound, the kind of release that leaves you lighter afterward. Lisa met me at her door with a glass of red already poured. No questions until I was settled on her couch with a blanket over my lap, and the city lights glittering through her living room window 40 minutes from our quiet suburb. We talked for hours, slowly at first, then in rushes, about the months I'd missed the signs, the way I'd convinced myself his distance was just work stress or the natural ebb of a long marriage, how part of me still wanted to believe the "I love you" he'd said in the kitchen that first night, even though it came wrapped in qualifiers. She listened, refilled my glass when it got low, and when I finally ran out of words, she said, "You're allowed to not know what you want yet, but if you stay, it has to be different. Rules, accountability, no more parallel lives." The word rules stuck with me. Practical and cold, but necessary. So later, when she'd gone to bed, I opened a new note on my phone and started typing under the heading, non-negotiables for now. 1. Complete phone and device access whenever asked. No deletions, no private folders. 2. Location sharing turned on permanently. 3. No contact with Elena or anyone else remotely similar, ever. Block preemptively if needed. 4. Weekly check-ins, just us, no distractions, where we actually talk about feelings instead of schedules. 5. Individual therapy for both of us, joint if when I'm ready. 6. No pretending everything's fine in front of Jamie, but no unloading on him either. We protect his normal. 7. Date nights only when I initiate them, no pressure. Reading the list back felt clinical, almost contractual, but it also felt like boundaries instead of freefall, like I was building a scaffolding around something that might still be salvageable. I texted the list to Alex around midnight, no preamble, just the bullet points, then turned my phone face down on the coffee table and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally pulled me under. Saturday morning, Lisa dragged me to a yoga class at the studio down the block, the kind with gentle flows and essential oil diffusers. And though my body felt stiff and resistant at first, by the end of Savasana, the tears came again, silent and cleansing, dripping into my mat while the instructor's voice reminded us to let go of what no longer served us. Afterward, we walked to a small cafe, ordered avocado toast and lattes, and I told her about the list. She read it on my phone, nodded slowly. It's a start. He either meets it or he doesn't. The rest of the weekend passed in quiet pockets, reading on her balcony, wrapped in a throw, long walks along the path by the river where joggers passed in bright jackets, evenings with takeout Thai and old sitcoms we'd watched in high school, each hour giving me distance from the house that still smelled faintly of Alex's cologne and Jamie's laundry detergent. Sunday night I drove back, the highway emptier, my duffel lighter somehow, and when I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was on, the living room windows glowing soft yellow. Inside, the house was tidy, dishes done, counters wiped, Jamie already asleep with his reading lamp still on, and Alex was at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea waiting, chamomile again, steeped steam curling up in faint spirals. He didn't stand when I walked in, just looked up and said, "I read the list. I agreed to all of it. I printed it out, signed it like a contract if that helps." The paper was on the table, his messy signature at the bottom, next to mine where I'd added it digitally before sending. I didn't smile, didn't thank him, just nodded, picked up the mug and sat across from him. We drank in silence for a while, the clock ticking, the furnace humming, until I finally said, "Therapy starts this week. I booked individual for me Wednesday. You find yours." He nodded. "Already did, Thursday." Small steps, fragile as new ice, but steps nonetheless, towards something that might one day feel like trust again, or at least toward the possibility of deciding together whether to keep going. I finished my tea, rinsed the mug, and went upstairs to check on Jamie, pausing only to glance back at Alex, still sitting there, staring at the signed paper like it was both lifeline and indictment. And for the first time since the kitchen confrontation, I let myself think, maybe, just maybe, we weren't finished writing our story yet. Wednesday arrived with the kind of ordinary gray sky that makes everything feel muted. The kind of day where the alarm feels personal, and the coffee tastes like obligation rather than comfort. And I sat in the therapist's waiting room 15 minutes early, because arriving late would have meant admitting I was more nervous than I wanted to be. My hands folded in my lap over the canvas tote that held my water bottle, a half-read paperback I hadn't touched in weeks, and the notebook I'd started filling with fragmented thoughts since the weekend at Lisa's. The office was on the third floor of a nondescript medical building near the highway, the kind of place you drive past 100 times without noticing. Neutral beige walls and abstract prints that were probably meant to be calming, but mostly looked like smudged watercolor. When the door opened and Dr. Patel called my name, soft voice, warm smile that didn't feel forced, I followed her into a room that smelled faintly of lavender from a diffuser on the side table, 2 armchairs angled toward each other, with a small box of tissues between them, like an unspoken invitation. She was in her late 50s, silver threaded through dark hair pulled into a low bun, wearing a cardigan the color of oatmeal and glasses that slipped slightly when she nodded. And after the basic paperwork and the quiet explanation that nothing I said would leave the room unless I was in danger or planning to harm someone, she asked simply, "What brought you here today, Sarah?" The question was so open, so gentle, that the answer rushed out before I could edit it. Alex's name first, then Alina's, then the 4 months that had rewritten every memory I thought I owned, the way I'd found myself questioning whether the good parts had ever been real or just convenient pauses between his secret conversations. I talked about Jamie too, how protecting him felt like the only clear directive left, how I woke up each morning checking to see if the ache in my chest had lessened overnight and finding it still there, stubborn and dull, like a bruise you keep pressing to test if it hurts. Dr. Patel listened without interrupting, jotting occasional notes on a legal pad, her pen moving in small, deliberate strokes. And when I finally ran dry, she asked, "What do you notice in your body when you think about forgiveness?" The question caught me off guard. I'd expected more probing about Alex's motives or my own shortcomings, but instead we spent the next 40 minutes mapping the physical sensations. Tight throat when I pictured his phone lighting up with her name, hollow stomach when Jamie laughed at something Alex said over dinner, the strange warmth that still flickered in my chest when he looked at me with unguarded regret, as though part of me remembered loving him before the remembering turned painful. By the end of the hour, my face was wet again, but the tears felt different, less like drowning, more like draining an abscess, and when I left, I carried a single homework assignment. Notice one small moment each day when I felt safe in my own skin, no matter how tiny, and write it down without judgment. Driving home through after-school traffic, the radio off, I caught myself doing it almost immediately, stopping at a red light, sunlight slanting through the windshield on my hands on the wheel, the faint heat of it reminding me I was still here, still breathing, still capable of feeling something neutral and kind toward myself. That night, Alex was home before me, the kitchen smelling of garlic and tomatoes because he'd started dinner, spaghetti, Jamie's favorite, the sauce simmering while he helped with long division homework at the island, and when I walked in, Jamie ran over for a hug, chattering about the science experiment they'd done with baking soda and vinegar, while Alex glanced up, eyes searching mine for a second before returning to the worksheet. We ate together at the table for the first time since the confrontation, not talking much beyond Jamie's stories and the occasional pass the Parmesan, but the silence wasn't hostile. It was careful, like 2 people learning to share oxygen in a small space again. After Jamie brushed his teeth and I read him 2 chapters of his current book, the one about the boy and the dragon where everything gets resolved by honesty, I came downstairs to find Alex loading the dishwasher, sleeves rolled up, the same careful movements he'd used when we were first married and still figuring out whose turn it was to rinse plates. He didn't look at me right away, just kept working until the last fork was in place, then turned off the water and dried his hands on a dish towel. "How was therapy?" he asked, voice low enough that it wouldn't carry upstairs. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not in defense but to hold myself steady. "Hard, good hard." She asked questions I didn't know how to answer yet. He nodded, folding the towel with precision. "Mine's tomorrow. I'm nervous." The admission surprised me, not because he felt it, but because he said it out loud without prompting. In the old days, he would have shrugged off vulnerability with a joke or changed the subject to sports scores. I studied his face, the faint lines around his eyes deeper now, the way his mouth turned down at the corners when he was thinking, and felt a small, reluctant thaw in the center of my chest. "That's okay," I said. "Being nervous means you care about getting it right." He met my eyes then, really met them, and for a moment the kitchen felt smaller, the space between us charged but not with anger. He took a half step closer, stopped when he saw me tense, and instead held out his hand, palm up on the counter, an offering rather than a demand. I looked at it for a long beat, the familiar callus on his ring finger from years of gripping a baseball bat in college, the faint scar from the kitchen knife slip when Jamie was 2, and slowly, carefully, I placed my fingertips on his palm, not lacing fingers, just resting there, skin to skin, the contact so tentative it barely registered as touch, yet it sent a quiet current up my arm, reminding me how long it had been since we'd connected without words or expectation. Neither of us spoke. We stood like that until the dishwasher clicked into its drying cycle, the soft hum filling the room, and when I finally pulled my hand back, he didn't chase it, just let his drop to his side with a small exhale that sounded like relief. "Thank you," he whispered, and I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. Upstairs I changed into pajamas, brushed my teeth, and climbed into the guest bed again. But before turning off the lamp, I opened the notebook Dr. Patel had suggested I keep, and wrote the first entry. Tonight when the light was low in the kitchen and Jamie was asleep, I let Alex's hand hold mine for maybe 10 seconds. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the messages or the months. But my shoulders dropped, and for that moment I didn't feel like I was carrying the whole broken thing alone. I closed the notebook, switched off the light, and lay in the dark listening to the house, the faint creak of Alex moving in our bedroom down the hall, the furnace kicking on against the dropping temperature outside, Jamie's soft snore through the wall, and felt the smallest shift. Not toward forgiveness exactly, but toward the possibility that vulnerability could be a bridge instead of a trap. The next morning I woke before the alarm, made coffee for both of us without thinking, left his mug on the counter with a post-it note that said only, "Good luck today." And when he saw it before leaving for his own session, his eyes met mine across the kitchen, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us like shared breath. Jamie came down sleepy-eyed and demanding pancakes, and as I flipped them on the griddle, Alex helped set the table, our movements overlapping in the small space without collision. And for the first time in weeks, the ordinary felt less like performance and more like practice, rehearsing a life we might still want to live together, one careful, honest moment at a time. The first joint session landed on a Thursday in late March, 6 weeks after I had started seeing Dr. Patel alone, and 4 after Alex began with his own therapist, a man named Dr. Nguyen, whose office was across town in a converted Victorian with creaky hardwood floors and a waiting room that smelled faintly of cedar. We'd agreed to try couples work only after both of us had individually said yes in our separate sessions. No pressure, no deadline, just a quiet mutual nod over breakfast one Saturday when Jamie was at a friend's birthday party and the house felt unusually still. I drove us there together because separate cars seemed too symbolic of distance. The radio tuned low to a station playing acoustic covers so we wouldn't have to fill the silence with forced small talk. My hands tight on the wheel while Alex stared out the passenger window at the budding trees along the parkway, their branches still bare but tipped with green promise that felt almost mocking given how raw everything still was inside the car. The building was quiet when we arrived, late afternoon light slanting through tall windows, and Dr. Patel greeted us in the hallway with the same calm smile she used for individuals, ushering us into a slightly larger room with a love seat and 2 armchairs arranged in a loose triangle, a low table between us holding only a box of tissues and a small plant with waxy leaves. She sat first, notebook on her knee, and invited us to choose seats. I took the love seat because sitting side by side felt less confrontational than facing each other across an open space, and Alex settled beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his arm, a proximity that made my pulse jump in a way that was equal parts memory and caution. Dr. Patel started gently, explaining the ground rules we'd already agreed to. No interrupting, no name-calling, speak from I statements, pause if things escalated. But then she turned to me and asked the question that had been circling in my head for weeks. "Sarah, when you think about what happened, what is the deepest hurt you're carrying right now?" The words came out before I could rehearse them, low and steady despite the tremor in my hands. That he chose to feel seen by someone else instead of telling me I wasn't seeing him. That for months he built a version of himself with her that he didn't share with me, and I was left loving a man who was only half here. Alex inhaled sharply beside me, the sound audible in the quiet room, and when Dr. Patel nodded for him to respond, he spoke without looking at me at first, voice rough like he'd swallowed sandpaper. I told myself it wasn't cheating because we never touched, but I know now that emotional intimacy is its own kind of betrayal. I was scared. Scared of the monotony creeping in, scared I was disappearing into dad and husband and nothing else. And instead of talking to you about it, I let someone else fill the space. I'm ashamed of that cowardice every day. The admission hung there, heavier than any of the individual confessions we traded at home, and I felt tears prick behind my eyes, not the hot, angry ones from February, but something slower, sadder, like grieving a version of us that had died without a funeral. Dr. Patel asked us to name the deeper issues underneath. Mine was abandonment wrapped in invisibility, the fear that if I wasn't constantly attentive, I'd be replaced. His was inadequacy, the quiet terror that he wasn't enough for the life we'd built, that the spark he felt with Elena was proof he'd failed at keeping our marriage alive. Hearing him say it out loud, seeing the way his shoulders curved inward as though the words physically weighed him down, cracked something open in me. Not forgiveness yet, but recognition that the man who'd hurt me was also hurting, had been hurting long before Elena's name appeared on his phone. We spent the rest of the hour mapping those wounds on a large sheet of paper Dr. Patel unrolled across the table, drawing lines between fear and behavior, between unmet needs and secret escapes, the ink bleeding slightly where our hands shook as we added arrows and notes. By the end, the page looked like a tangled web, but seeing it externalized made it feel less like an internal storm and more like a problem we could study together. When the session ended, Dr. Patel suggested a small homework, 1 act of vulnerability each day, something small and observable, no grand gestures, just evidence that we were willing to be seen again. We drove home in near silence, again, but this time the quiet felt companionable rather than suffocating, the city lights smearing past the windows in soft streaks of gold and red. Back at the house, Jamie was already in pajamas, sprawled on the living room rug with his math homework spread around him like fallen leaves, and when we walked in, he looked up, grinned. "You guys were gone forever. Did you bring ice cream?" We hadn't, but Alex crouched beside him, ruffled his hair, and said, "How about we make hot chocolate instead, with the mini marshmallows you like?" Jamie scrambled up, tugging Alex toward the kitchen, and I followed more slowly, pausing in the doorway to watch them, Alex lifting Jamie onto the counter so he could reach the cocoa tin, their laughter low and easy, the same scene that used to make my heart swell with uncomplicated joy. Tonight, it still hurt, but the hurt had edges now, defined instead of overwhelming, and when Alex glanced over his shoulder at me, holding up the bag of marshmallows in question, I nodded yes, stepped into the room and took 3 mugs from the cabinet without being asked. We drank the hot chocolate at the table, Jamie between us telling a convoluted story about a playground argument over whose turn it was on the swings, and when he finished and yawned so wide his jaw cracked, I carried him upstairs for bedtime, reading the next chapter while Alex lingered in the doorway, arms folded, listening. After Jamie's eyes drifted closed, I turned off the lamp and stepped into the hall. Alex was still there, closer than he'd been in weeks, and instead of moving aside, he lifted his hand slowly, palm open, the same gesture from the kitchen weeks ago. This time, I didn't hesitate quite as long. I placed my hand in his, fingers threading together naturally, the fit still familiar despite everything. His thumb brushed once across my knuckles in a motion so light it could have been accidental, but wasn't. We stood like that in the dim hallway, the nightlight from Jamie's room casting faint stars across the carpet, until I felt the tension in my shoulders ease another fraction, until the simple act of holding hands felt less like surrender and more like choosing to try. Downstairs, we didn't speak about it right away. We cleared the mugs, wiped the counter, turned off lights in the usual rotation, but when we reached the bottom of the stairs, he paused, turned to me, and said quietly, "Thank you for coming today, for staying in the room even when it was hard." I looked up at him, really looked at him, the man I married at 25, who'd cried at our wedding when he saw me walk down the aisle, who'd held my hand through 12 hours of labor with Jamie, who'd hurt me deeply, and now was trying, clumsily but earnestly, to repair it. "Thank you for showing up too," I said, and meant it. We slept in separate beds again that night, the guest room still mine, our bedroom still his, but before I closed my door, I left it cracked an inch, a small signal that the wall wasn't solid anymore, and when I heard him pass by later to check on Jamie, I felt his footsteps hesitate outside my room for a moment before moving on, the pause itself a kind of tenderness. In the dark, I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the steady beat beneath, and whispered to the empty room the first real vulnerability I'd allowed myself since February. I don't know if I can forgive him completely, but I want to. The words settled around me like a blanket, not warm yet, but no longer freezing, and for the first time in months, sleep came without tears, without the restless turning that had become habit, just quiet, tentative hope threading through the ordinary night sounds of the house, reminding me that healing wasn't a straight line or a sudden miracle, but a series of small, brave openings, one held hand at a time. The idea for the family weekend came from Dr. Patel during our 4th joint session in early April, when the air outside had finally lost its bite and the daffodils along the front walk were pushing up stubborn yellow heads through the mulch Alex had spread last fall. She'd asked us to think about a small, contained experience where we could practice being together without the daily scaffolding of school runs and work deadlines, something that would test the fragile new habits we'd been building, shared glances over Jamie's head, brief touches that lingered a second longer each time, evenings where we sat on the couch watching his favorite animated series and our knees brushed without either of us pulling away. And when she suggested a short trip somewhere familiar yet neutral, the lake house rose in my mind almost immediately. The same rented cabin on the quiet finger of water an hour and a half north, where we'd gone every spring since Jamie was 4. The place with the creaky screen door and the dock that jutted out over water so clear you could see minnows darting beneath your feet. Alex's eyes lit when I mentioned it in the car on the way home, a flicker of genuine warmth that made my chest tighten in a way that was no longer entirely painful. He said yes before I could second-guess myself, booked the same unit for the upcoming 3-day weekend, and we told Jamie over dinner that night, pancakes for dessert because it was Friday, watching his face light up at the promise of fishing, s'mores, and no homework until Monday. Packing felt strangely intimate, folding Jamie's swim trunks even though the water would still be too cold for swimming, tucking in his favorite stuffed dragon that had lost one eye last summer, adding my own hoodie and the novel I still hadn't finished, noticing how Alex slipped in the board games we used to play on rainy afternoons, and the small Bluetooth speaker for music without asking, small gestures that spoke of intention rather than performance. We left early Saturday morning, Jamie in the back seat with his tablet loaded with downloaded episodes, Alex driving so I could watch the highway unspool ahead, the radio playing softly, old playlists from our dating years that neither of us commented on but neither of us changed. The first hour was easy, Jamie narrating the scenery like a tour guide, pointing out hawks circling above the fields, asking if we could stop for donuts at the roadside stand we always passed. We did, pulling into the gravel lot, the three of us stepping out into crisp air that smelled of pine and sugar, Alex buying a half-dozen Blazed while Jamie and I waited at a picnic table, his small hand in mine, warm and trusting, and when Alex came back balancing the box and 3 coffees, he set mine in front of me with a quiet, extra cream, no sugar, the way I'd always taken it. The small accuracy of the detail landing like a soft punch, reminding me how well he once knew me, how much of that knowing might still be salvageable. At the lake house, we fell into old routines without discussion, Jamie racing to claim the top bunk in the loft, Alex unloading groceries while I opened windows to let out the winter staleness, the sound of lake water lapping against the dock filtering in like background music. The first afternoon passed in ordinary pieces, Jamie and Alex on the dock with fishing poles they never really expected to catch anything with, me sitting on the Adirondack chair with a book I pretended to read while watching them, the way Alex crouched beside Jamie to adjust his grip, patient, present, the laughter drifting back to me across the water when Jamie's bobber dipped and they both whooped even though it was just a weed. Dinner was burgers on the grill, Alex manning the flames while I sliced tomatoes and Jamie set the picnic table with mismatched plates, and afterward we built a fire in the stone pit, the three of us wrapped in blankets, roasting marshmallows until they caught fire and Jamie shrieked with delight, Alex's arm resting along the back of the bench behind me, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the shift in air when he moved. When Jamie finally yawned himself into sleepiness, we carried him inside, teeth brushed with lake water from the tap, story read in the loft while firelight flickered up the stairs, and once his breathing evened out, we came back down to the deck, the night quiet except for crickets and the occasional splash of a fish jumping. We sat on the steps, shoulders almost brushing, staring at the stars reflected on the black water, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Then Alex said, very quietly, I missed this. Not just the place, the us that used to come here. The words hung between us, honest and unguarded, and I felt the familiar ache rise, but tempered now by weeks of therapy and small daily proofs that he was trying. I turned to him, searching his face in the dim glow from the dying fire. I missed it too, I admitted, the truth slipping out easier than I expected, but I'm still scared it won't last. He nodded, slow, accepting. I know, I'm scared of that too, but I'm not running anymore. Whatever happens, I want to face it with you. Something loosened in my chest then, not a full release, but a crack wide enough to let air in, and when he lifted his hand, I met it halfway, our fingers lacing together, palms pressing firm this time, no hesitation. We stayed like that until the fire burned to embers, the cold creeping in, and when we finally went inside, he paused at the doorway to the bedroom, our bedroom here, the same queen bed with the quilt that always smelled faintly of cedar, and looked at me, question in his eyes. I nodded once, small but certain, and we climbed in together for the first time since February, not rushing to touch beyond the initial brush of legs under the covers, just lying side by side, listening to each other breathe, the space between us shrinking gradually until my head found its old place on his shoulder, his arm coming around me tentative at first, then steadier when I didn't pull away. Sleep came slowly, layered with awareness, of his heartbeat under my cheek, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his hand rested lightly on my back as though afraid to hold too tight. But when it arrived, it was deep, dreamless, the kind I hadn't had in months. Sunday brought more of the same, morning coffee on the dock with Jamie skipping stones, a hike along the wooded trail where we held hands the whole way, Jamie running ahead then circling back to grab both our free hands so we walked three abreast, swinging him over roots and puddles, laughter echoing through the trees. That night, after Jamie was asleep, we sat on the deck again, this time closer, my back against his chest, his arms around me, the fire crackling low. Words came easier now, quiet confessions about fears we'd never voiced before, apologies that didn't need to be dramatic to be real, promises that felt less like vows and more like intentions we'd check in on every day. When the cold finally drove us inside, we made love for the first time since the discovery, not frantic or desperate to prove anything, but slow, careful, almost reverent, every touch a question, and every response an answer, tears mixing with laughter when the awkwardness of relearning each other surfaced, tenderness when we found the familiar paths again. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, his fingers tracing lazy circles on my shoulder, and I whispered into the dark, I forgive you, not all at once, not completely, but enough to keep going. He pressed a kiss to my temple, voice thick. Thank you. I'll spend every day earning the rest. Monday morning, we drove home quiet but lighter, Jamie in the back seat clutching his dragon, the lake house receding in the rear view like a bookmark in a chapter we weren't ready to close. The weekend hadn't erased the scars. Trust still felt thin in places. Forgiveness still arrived in increments. But it had given us proof that we could be in the same space, the same story, without the past swallowing us whole. And as the city skyline rose ahead, Alex's hand found mine on the console, fingers threading together naturally. I let them stay there the rest of the drive, holding on not out of fear, but out of something harder earned, something beginning to feel like hope again. A year to the day since that February night when the kitchen mug shattered and the world tilted, I woke before the alarm in our bedroom. Not the guest room, not the lake house bed for a weekend trial, but the same mattress we'd bought right after the wedding, the one with the slight dip on my side from years of curling toward him in sleep. Sunlight filtered through the half-open blinds in thin gold stripes across the quilt, catching dust motes that drifted lazy and unhurried. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the sight didn't trigger a reflexive scan for signs of distance. No phone face down on his nightstand, no tension in the set of his shoulders, even in sleep. Alex was still beside me, breathing slow and even, one arm flung across the pillow where my head had been until I shifted. His face looked softer in repose. The worry lines that had deepened around his eyes last winter now faded to faint echoes, as though time and effort had sanded them down without erasing them completely. I lay there, listening to the house wake up around us, the furnace clicking off as the thermostat registered the morning warmth, Jamie's door creaking open down the hall, followed by the soft thud of his feet on the stairs, the faint clink of a cereal bowl being pulled from the cabinet, and felt something settle in my chest. Not the bright certainty of fairy tale reunion, but a quieter certainty. We had made it through the hardest part, scarred and changed, but together. Downstairs, Jamie was already at the island, pouring milk over Cheerios with the concentration of a scientist, his hair still sleep-tousled and sticking up in the back the way Alex's used to when we were younger. He looked up when I came in, grinned around a mouthful. "Morning, Mom. Dad said we're doing the thing today, right? The anniversary breakfast?" I nodded, ruffling his hair as I passed, and started the coffee maker, the familiar gurgle and hiss filling the kitchen like a ritual we'd reclaimed. Alex appeared a few minutes later in sweatpants and the old college hoodie he'd worn threadbare, eyes still heavy with sleep but brightening when they found me. He came up behind me at the counter, hesitated for half a heartbeat, the old caution still there, never fully gone, then rested his hands lightly on my hips, chin dipping to my shoulder in the way he used to every morning before everything fractured. "Happy not the end day," he murmured against my ear, voice low and rough from sleep, and I let out a small laugh that surprised me with its ease, turning in his arms to face him. "Happy surviving us day," I corrected, and he smiled, not the careful, measured one he'd worn for months, but the real one, crooked at the corners, the one that used to make my stomach flip in the best way. We moved around each other with the practiced rhythm of people who had relearned every step. Him cracking eggs into the pan for scrambled while I sliced fruit. Jamie chattering about the middle school science fair project he was presenting next week. The three of us filling the space without crowding it, without the undercurrent of performance that had lingered even after the lake house weekend. Breakfast stretched longer than usual. Pancakes shaped like soccer balls for Jamie because Alex still remembered how, extra bacon because I liked it crisp, coffee refilled without asking, and when the plates were cleared, we lingered at the table, sunlight pooling on the wood, talking about nothing and everything. Jamie's upcoming tournament, the new client Alex was excited about at work, my decision to apply for the lead teacher position at school next year. No one mentioned Elena or the messages or the nights we'd slept apart. Those ghosts still existed, would always exist in some quiet corner, but they no longer sat at the table with us. Later, after Jamie had disappeared upstairs to finish homework and text friends about weekend plans, Alex and I stayed in the kitchen, dishes soaking in the sink, and he pulled a small envelope from the junk drawer, the one we both pretended not to notice when we needed something quick, and handed it to me without fanfare. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his handwriting neat for once, a list titled Year 1 Promises, Ongoing, bullet points that echoed but expanded on the non-negotiables I'd texted him from Lisa's place so long ago. Continued therapy, individual and joint, monthly check-ins even when things felt steady, daily moments of gratitude spoken out loud no matter how small. At the bottom, in smaller script, and every day I choose you again, not because I have to, because I want to. My throat tightened. I looked up to find him watching me, eyes steady, unguarded. "I added a few," he said softly. "Figured we've earned an update." I set the paper down, reached across the table, and took his hand, fingers threading together without hesitation now, calluses familiar under my thumb, and held it there until the warmth spread from palm to palm, up my arm, into the places that had stayed cold longest. "Thank you," I said, meaning it for the list, for the year, for the man who'd stayed when leaving would have been easier. He squeezed back once, then stood, pulling me up with him, and we ended up on the couch in the living room, the same one Jamie had outgrown but we'd never replaced, my head on his chest, his arm around my shoulders, the television off for once, just the sound of the neighborhood outside, kids shouting on bikes, a lawnmower starting 2 houses down, birds in the maple tree by the window. We didn't speak for a long time, and we didn't need to. The closeness wasn't perfect. There were still days when doubt flickered, when a late text from work made my stomach dip, when I caught myself watching him too closely for signs. But those moments passed faster now, met with conversation instead of silence, with reassurance instead of retreat. Jamie came down eventually, flopped between us with his phone, showing us memes that made him laugh until he snorted. And we let him stay there, legs tangled, the three of us fitting together in a way that felt earned rather than assumed. As the afternoon light slanted lower, turning the room golden, I felt the quiet weight of it all, the pain we'd carried, the work we'd done, the bond we'd rebuilt, not despite the cracks, but through them, stronger in the mending. No fairy tale ending waited, no sudden perfection, no guarantee the scars wouldn't ache on rainy days, but what we had was real, tested, chosen daily. Alex pressed a kiss to my temple, murmured something too soft for Jamie to hear, "Love you still," and I turned my face into his shoulder, whispering back the same, the words carrying the full weight of the year behind them. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing, dogs barking, life ordinary and relentless. But inside, in this small pocket of time, we sat together, scarred but steadier, holding on not out of desperation, but out of something deeper, something that had learned to bend without breaking. And for the first time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the best parts of our story weren't behind us after all.